Upgrading from the good but not great OEM upper trailing arms in my 6th gen Camaro, as you can see right here, to the super nice and very stout BMR upper trailing arms right here. Let's get this installed. Welcome everyone to the Derpzilla channel, and for today, part 4 of my BMR suspension upgrades on my 2021 Camaro ZL1. And for today, I'll be working on these super nice BMR upper trailing arms right here. This is part number UTCA058. BMR actually offers 3 variations of their upper trailing arms. The non-adjustable, which is what I'm going for, because frankly, I just don't have time or the patience to keep adjusting this, and I don't really go to the track, so I don't really need the extra adjustability. I'd rather just set this in the car, get it installed, and then pretty much forget it, other than having to grease this bushing on occasion. The other 2 variations that they do offer is a single adjustable and an on-car adjustable. I'll have links in the description for all of those, and the install process for these are pretty much the same. With the adjustable ones, you actually just have to pretty much pull out the OEM part. You're going to then adjust out your trailing arm here to line up with the OEM one, lock it in place, install it in your car, and then of course it'll be different once you actually are on the car and needing to do your alignment and all that fun stuff. But for me, I'm doing the non-adjustable, super stout box steel CNC constructions. I think it's 1.5 inch steel. Super nice powder coated finish, or I can bang them together. The finish is very durable, very nice. Has a polyurethane bushing right here. I think it says it's a 90 or 95 on the tensile strength or whatever. Not very reflective, much more durable and stout than this very flimsy rubber bushing on the OEM one. Over here on the driver's side of my ZL1, and here is the rear suspension. And of course, this right here is the upper control arm. You have your upper trailing arm, which is what we're going to be replacing today. And if you saw my part 3, this is the lower trailing arm right here, which I replaced previously. And as you can see, much nicer looking. But if we go around to my passenger side, actually I've already installed this, including a few other parts. And this is what it's going to look like once it's installed. As you can see here, very nice, super stout, not going to go anywhere, and it should really help us on our, fishtailing a little bit when you're getting onto it hard on the highway or whatever, or launching the car. So that's why we're getting this whole suspension upgrade in place. I apologize for the delay between my part 3 and my part 4. I've actually picked up a 3D printer and have been kind of tinkering with the 3D printer, working on maybe coming out with some ASA emblems for my car. And here's just some prototypes and whatnot. Having fun with that. So it's kind of delayed me getting this suspension finished on the car. But hopefully I get this thing finished up finally, and I get this car aligned and back on the road. But back to the install. For this install, the upper trailing arms, really you don't need that many parts or components or tools. You just need a 22mm socket. I like this one. Has the little soft little sleeve here. This is actually to get your wheels off. My wheel is already off the car from my previous install, but yeah, something like this works great on getting those lug nuts removed and your wheel removed without damaging it. And then of course you're going to need 18mm wrench, 18mm socket, Sharpie of some sort, or a paint pen, so you can actually be marking for when you do your torque to yield your extra rotation on your torque values. For your bolts, you're going to need 2 of these GM OEM bolts and 2 nuts. BMR recommends that you replace them with these replacement ones. I'll have the part numbers in the description, but they do say that you can reuse them. Legalese, they say you should reuse these, but because these are torque to yield, they do stretch each time you torque them, and they will eventually wear out. And so they have slightly different, I believe, torque values if you reuse these bolts. But I'm going to go ahead and replace them with brand new GM ones, which I recommend for any of these, just because, I mean, for a few dollars, why not? You're replacing, it's an expensive car, expensive components. No point in saving a few dollars on some bolts. That's just my suggestion. Anyways, you're also going to want to have a grease gun of some sort. I'm using the Super Lube grease. That's going to be actually used to grease the fitting of the component of the bushing right here. You're going to want a hydraulic jack of some sort. I got it right here. That's going to actually help us preload the suspension when we torque everything to spec. You want your suspension loaded before you torque it, so you actually will have proper torque and proper setup of your suspension when the car is going to be under load, sitting on, on the pavement. It's not going to be floating there like this. So of course you don't want to torque your components in that situation. Back at the rear of the car, here is our upper trailing arm. Now, of course, if you're doing suspension, you're doing a full install, and you have, you're replacing everything like I am, I would recommend doing all of them together at once versus one at a time, which I'm doing for this video series, which I'm only doing because of the video series. The other side I did all at once. It just, you're reworking, redoing everything, it's more work. So if you have all the components, you're doing them all together, do them all at the same time. Don't exactly follow how I'm doing one at a time. You're just gonna cost yourself some more work. Anyways, we've got the 18mm bolt nut right here. Do make note of the orientation of the bolt and nut. So if you look here, the bolt head is coming from the rear of the car, going forward. So the nut is on the forward portion of the bolt, on the front inner and the outer, or inner and outer portion of the upper trailing arm. So when you put in the new BMR part, you want to do that exact same process. You want the bolt to come in from the right side with the nut on the forward portion of the car on both ends. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my socket and my wrench and get these bolts removed. This one was a little bit more of a pain just because of the clearance thing here, but it did come out. Of course, if you have air tools or something like that that can reach in here, it'll work much easier. But went with the old manual way, figure why not. Anyways, this one seems like the bolt is pretty loose, so it looks like it's coming right out. Makes things easy. And that should free up this one. There we go, the other bolt. And a little bit of a tight fit, but you can kind of maneuver it out. And here is the OEM upper trailing arm. Super easy, 2 bolts, 2 nuts. I mean, this one was very, very easy to pull out. I guess that's what she says. Anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and wipe down this whole area here. You wanna make sure this is nice and clean. You don't want this to be all crudded up or whatever. And then we'll go to the BMR one, get that bad boy installed. BMR upper trailing arm, as you can see here, with the 2 GM OEM bolts and nuts. And I've put no grease on the outside of the bushing. The instructions didn't call for it, and I figured if you did, gravel and rocks would get caught between the bushing possibly, or on the edge, and the metal, and maybe grind away on that. And I don't think it's really required. So this is kind of tricky. There's not much clearance, but what we need to do is we need to get this in like that. You want your grease fitting on the top. Do not install it upside down. That will not work properly. And of course you can tell this kind of flat welded in piece right here is going to be on the top as well. And somehow I need to maneuver this in here without impacting the rest of the suspension. So I'm gonna have to work with this to see how the best path of getting this in here, because you can't just push this through. There's just no room for it. All right, I just cannot get this to fit, is just because this bushing here is so much more stout, and this component is so much more stout than the OEM one. OEM one I was able to just remove, just kind of turn it. This one, it's just too big to wedge in there, and it impacting this upper control arm. Now, I looked over the BMR instructions. They do say to make this install easier, you can remove this side, this bolt from the upper control arm. Now keep in mind, if you don't plan on replacing the upper control arm, which I will be doing, so I'm gonna actually remove this bolt, lift this up, and get this in place, which is fine for me. But if you don't plan on replacing the upper control arm, I would recommend buying an additional bolt. I'll put the part number for this bolt in the description as well. You can reuse the bolt, which is fine, but if you don't plan on reusing or replacing this anytime soon, it's gonna be a few years or whatever, you probably want to just put a new bolt in here if you remove this. You might be able to tweak around this hub, lift this up, and try to spend a bunch of time and getting this maybe fit in here. But for me, I'm just gonna go ahead and remove this. Should also be 18mm bolt and a nut. Slide that out. I'm gonna lift this up. Upper control arm bolt has been removed, and as you can see, I have more clearance here to move this upper control arm. And I guess a bonus of that is because of how mushy those OEM suspension bushings are. I mean, look at that, how much flex you get from that bushing. It's just like a pile of jelly. And of course, I don't want to damage this hose right here. So I'm just gonna move that to the side here. And now, hopefully, we can get our upper trailing arm in place, and well, we'll see. There we go. And now we can move the wheel hub a little bit and get upper trailing arm here in place. Now I have my bolts here, and just remember how you took the bolts off is how you want to replace them. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the upper trailing arm back, and now I can get the bolts in. I have the outer bolt in place. Definitely, I didn't film all this, but it took a good 5 minutes to get this situated. I reattached the bolt in the upper control arm. I did have to kind of maneuver the hub, the rotor, whatnot, a little bit to get this bolt in. I had to apply a little of the extra hammer force, just a little bit, tap it through. I don't have this one yet, so I'm probably gonna have to tap this one around until I can get this lined up up here. But overall, not super bad. It's just, I definitely would recommend, if you can, you don't mind, you know, messing with the upper control arm, go ahead and pull this bolt. I don't see how to do it without doing this because of just how stout this piece is. When I did the other side, I had the whole suspension. I took everything out and put everything in, so I didn't have to deal with that. So that's why it was the first time for me experiencing that with this car. Anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can get this bolt in. It's always good to have one of these non-marring hammers so you don't beat up your new suspension. Inner bolt is in place. Just need to tighten these up. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten these bolts. I'm gonna tighten this one back up. Now, if you were done with your upper control, I'm not gonna do a replacement later. You would, of course, wanna torque this just like I will be torquing these bolts right here. But for me, I'm just going to tighten this up and leave it. I'm not gonna actually torque it to spec. But for the upper trailing arm, I'm going to tighten this down. I'm not, of course, gonna, you know, you're not gonna Hulk it and get it super tight. I'm gonna tighten it down. Then we're gonna go through the torque procedure. We'll talk about that. And then what you have to do after you torque it to spec, you have to torque it to spec, and then you have to go an additional, I can't remember what it is, I think it's 90 to 100. We'll look at the instructions again, to double check. It's another, you know, about 100 degrees or 90 to 100 degrees, something like that, past the torque value. And of course, that torque value is gonna be different if you're reusing the bolt or you have new ones like I have. So let's go ahead and get this tightened up. We'll walk over to the workbench. I'll show you what we're talking about on getting this torqued properly. Okay, have these not tight, just brought in closer. I'm not gonna actually tighten these at all really until I get this portion of the suspension loaded. So I'm gonna actually get my jack under here, lift this up until it's just about to come off of my quick jack. So just when it's about to come off your jack, so that now I know I have the full load on the suspension and I can go ahead and then begin torquing everything. I wanted to very quickly show you how I loaded up the suspension. This is pretty much the second best way to do it. Of course, the best is if you can have the car completely on the ground and you can torque everything, but it's not really, it doesn't really work out. Sounds great, but you can't access some of these bolts with a, you know, with your torque wrench if the wheels are on and it's on the ground. Even if you have wheel cribs, some of them you can't really access. So this is second best, I guess. So I just got my jack here. I put one of a rubber pad here so I wouldn't mar up my rotor. Put on top of the jack, underneath the rotor, jacked it up. I felt my quick jack. This is one of the blocks it sits on. And right when I felt the tension coming off of this, where it felt a little loose, not completely loose where I can move it around, but I knew it was actually coming off of the jack just enough where the load is now on the actual suspension. And you can see everything's moved up. So now I should be good to proceed on getting everything tightened up and torqued to spec. For a quick break. All right, back to the install. Anyways, I have some conflicting information between the PDF for the install doc and an email I actually got from BMR a few years ago where they mentioned they're updating some of the torque spec values. Now, their PDF for the install mentioned the outer lower control arm bolt 74 foot-pounds and 105 degrees, and the inner lower control arm nut is 52 foot-pounds and 105 degrees. I'm going to be torquing directly on the bolt, so I would assume 74 foot-pounds and 105 degrees, but it looks like here they mention the upper and lower trailing arm bolts. They do say 74 foot-pounds and 105 degrees, so that is a good assumption. I guess if you can't reach the bolt, you would do the nut torque value, but I'll be doing 74 foot-pounds and 105 degrees. And what 105 degrees means is we will torque the bolt to 74 foot-pounds. I will then use a Sharpie, pick a spot on the bolt, mark it on the bolt and on the actual component, and then I will get my socket on there and a wrench. Really, the trick is to not let the wrench move, really. And then I'm going to spin the bolt an additional 105 degrees. So I'll mark a little line where I'm going to have to get the dot on the bolt to reach that line, 105 degrees. So usually I just go a little past 90, close enough, and that should get me my value. So also I noticed here where they mention if you are replacing your upper control arm bolt, they do say it is 52 foot-pounds. So that's the bolt that we removed to get that upper trailing arm in place. So 52 foot-pounds. If you're having a new bolt, if you're using the same bolt, reusing it, you're going to actually go to 81 foot-pounds with no additional degrees of rotation. You're just going to go to 81 foot-pounds. The bolt is already stretched, so that's why we go to 81 foot-pounds. But if we have a brand new bolt, it's 52 foot-pounds and 105 degrees. That's just for the upper control arm bolt and on the outer bolt. So just make sure you don't forget that if you're not replacing your upper control arm next. So before you go to alignment shop, make sure you get that bolt back into place and torque to spec. I have my super cheap torque wrench here, dialed into 74 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and get these tightened up. Both bolts are torqued to 74 foot-pounds. Now we're going to go ahead and do that additional 105 degree rotation. All right, you can kind of see the bolt here. This is the one I'm going to do 105 degrees, this is the outer bolt. And I'm at a real weird angle here. But what I'm going to do is get my Sharpie, and then I'm going to mark on the bolt at one of these points. I think I'll do this point on the bottom. You can see right? Yeah, right on the bottom point. And then I'm going to go, so this would be 90 degrees right here. And since I want to do a little past that, I'm going to go to the flat portion of this right here. And I'm going to mark on the actual component here with the Sharpie. I'm going to put a dot here or a line, and then I'm going to do a line on the bolt. I'll show you once I do it. I can't really do it and hold the camera what I'm talking about. And then what we're going to do is get a breaker bar or something, and we're going to have to twist this bolt while holding the nut in place and not letting that rotate if possible, 105 degrees. Of course, my Sharpie died on me, but I went ahead and used a white paint pen, marked that corner right there on the bolt, and then a white dab on the suspension here. I'm going to have to get that corner rotated to line up with that mark right here. So I'm going to do that off camera because it's going to take a lot of effort. It's pretty hard to do because you are, stretching this bolt, and I can't juggle the camera, unfortunately, and holding the nut in place. Don't want the nut to rotate, because then of course it'll throw off your 105 degrees that you're aiming for. Here we can see the marking on the bolt lines up with the marking I left on the upper trailing arm, which means I got my 105 or about 105 degree rotation. So we should be good to go. Same exact process for the bolt back here, same value, 74 foot-pound, 105 degrees. I'm not gonna do that for this video, but do that. No point in showing you the same process again. Exact same procedure, mark, mark, push. It's awkward angle, so it's really hard to get that leverage to get that 105 degrees, because it's hard to push that 105 degrees while holding the nut from rotating. So good luck, get that knocked out. Going ahead and we'll connect my grease gun to the fitting here. And I'm still getting used to this new grease gun thing. It is kind of awkward. It clips on, you just push into snap it into place, but then you have to like torque it to an angle and then disengage it. It's super awkward, but getting it on usually is pretty easy, so we'll see what we got. All right, 4 to 5 pumps with the regular and unknown amount with an electric. And it looks like it's full. It's oozing out. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove this and wipe up any mess. Upper trailing arm is installed. Looking good, torqued to spec, and greased up. So we're good to go. Let's wrap this up. That completes the BMR upper trailing arm install. Overall, it's a pretty easy install other than that 105 degree additional torque to those bolts. I probably spent half of the full install just doing that. So that is definitely, it's just awkward. You have to get a lot of leverage because it actually feels like a lot more, it's probably over 100 foot-pounds of torque once you put that 105 degrees on. And you're stretching that bolt. So you're in a weird angle trying to get leverage on the bolt without letting the nut with the wrench on it move, because that'll throw off your 105 degree target. So everything but that, super easy install. Do keep in mind, you probably want to remove that outer upper control arm bolt so you can get room for your install. But overall, super pleased with it. Looks great. I'm going to be knocking out the upper control arm in the next video. This one is a wrap. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, found it useful. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment if you have any questions. Check out my other videos, the previous ones in this series, or my other Camaro videos, Explorer videos, tech videos, all the other fun stuff. Check out the shop if you like the hat. They have the ZL1 hats on my website, z1lla.com/shop. That's zilla.com/shop. Also on my Etsy store, etsy.zilla.com, z1lla.com. Of course, Zilla, Z-I-L-L-A, not available. So we got the Z1LLA instead. Got the hats, shirts, tons of other stuff. And hopefully soon I'll be including some cool ZL1 emblems and keychains and some other stuff, maybe magnets, whatever. These will be in ASA filament, which is super durable, UV resistant, heat resistant. And this is of course just a prototype, but I mean, it's super strong. This is, being a prototype, pretty ugly on the back. It's not gonna look like this when it's done. Probably be double-sided, all that fun stuff. Keep an eye out for that. Hopefully I'll be adding these sometime relatively soon. But overall, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Anyways, peace.